Rodriguez. He is the EMEA sales director at Entrust. Juan, please say hello.
Hello, Sam. Hello, panelists. Hello, everybody. For me, it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you guys. And it's an honor to share this panel discussion with these relevant people that NLS bring on the table. So I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Juan. Our next panelist is Samuel Karuki, who will be coming in slightly late. He's got held up with the CS of ICT. He's a senior digital executive at Microsoft. So once he comes, we'll let him in and just say hello and proceed forward. Our final panelist is Joel Onditi, CEO and President of Pathways Technologies Limited. Joel, kindly say hello.
Thank you very much, Sam. Hello to the panelists and hello to the rest of the team and the folks joining us online. Happy to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joel. To proceed quickly with this interesting conversation, I would like to kick off by asking Imelda this question. Imelda, from your perspective, what is an API-first culture? And why is it important to achieve digital, and why is it important in achieving digital transformation goals?
Okay, thank you for giving me the honor to kick off the discussion. The good thing with going fast is I'm sure everything that I leave out, the techies in the room will be able to add on to it. But from my perspective, I believe that an API first so let's break it down, right? That's a statement. API first culture is a statement. So if we break it down and start with API first, it's a product approach that views APIs as standalone products rather than just mechanisms for system integrations, right? So building solutions, building APIs as standalone products that can be leveraged for other systems. If I remember from my MBA class, what culture is the definition really is values and beliefs that drive what an organization lives and thrives on. So like what's our corporate culture? So if we combine the two, then I believe that an API first culture is a corporate culture that believes and works towards building APIs as discrete products that can be leveraged. And the objective is to make them universal so that they can be used either internally for other products and systems or from externally to enable other innovators to take advantage of them. So in answering your second question, Sam, why it's important in achieving digital transformation, I think it's good to discuss this within a context, right? For example, I'm a business person and my focus is taking technology solutions to market that are built for the underserved communities. And I believe as like many other segments, there's really different nuances from one segment to the other in what we're trying to address. In my perspective, I've seen the biggest challenges of taking tech to this and addressing solutions for the underserved communities is really the sheer cost of go-to-market. Right? I want to build commercially sustainable models, but my target market is very price conscious, right? You're talking about people living under $4 a day. They've not been using tech solutions effectively just because of the cost of access or cost around the environment that's allowing them to use tech. So but then you're building commercial models that are, zero to low margin commercial models. So one of the things that I do believe from my perspective that APIs can help in this manner, because then we can't sit and say we won't be able to take solutions to the underserved, then we're not addressing the digital transformation agenda, because the biggest issue here is technology access, right? So if we're building technology for these people, then we must address the issues of is it affordable? Is it accessible? And in such a way, then I've seen that APIs is a big tool in helping address the cost of technology, because then we're able to leverage on other solutions that have been built, other APIs that have been built, then we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Then you kind of address a big part of that challenge. So I'd say building affordable tech is one of the advantages of APIs, or the benefits to technology organizations. I'll say the second one is accelerating innovation. So we are able to enable innovators go to market faster with solutions that they've built. I think because of this, they're able to tap into other systems. They're able to add functionalities to their products. And, because of this, then they're able to build and go to market faster. You can imagine if Uber that we all use built their own GPS systems, rather than tapping into what Google Maps have done, then it would have taken way longer. It would have been more expensive. So that's just a simple example to say, if we leverage on APIs, and if everybody's building APIs well to be leveraged on other people, then we accelerate innovation. My third benefit from a business perspective is enhancing user experience. In this era, we're racing against instant gratification. Everybody from my child to my customers, you want to be able to access a service on your tablet or on your phone under 3 clicks. How are we able to do that if we do not have the right API? So I think if we're building a good user experience for our customers, then and leveraging on APIs, and we are able to drive adoption and active usage, then you find people are now more open to utilizing technology tools that are applicable to them. And I think then APIs in this way play a huge role in addressing this. I think an example that I think has been overused, but it is always good to talk about, is M-Pesa. Initially, when M-Pesa came, all the banks were looking at it as a competitor, but right now every single bank is integrating with M-Pesa just because they've been able to build an API that is leveraged by all. And what this has done for the payments industry is it's leapfrogged innovation. I think we're all in Kenya, or we've experienced Kenya, the payment ecosystem here, so we know what M-Pesa has done. From an internal product build perspective, I believe for our product teams, and I'm not a product manager or developer, but I know from our product teams, it really helps save time for developers, because then they're able to use APIs that they've built for other products. It's able to enhance quality of the products that we are churning out, but also shortens the learning curve in a way that developers are able to share best practice, to learn from each other, and then this overall enhances the quality of products we are churning out. I think to close the question is, we all know technology changes really fast, right? Today we're talking about ChatGPT. I think it's 4 now, Michie. So everything is changing every day. So how are we able to utilize APIs to ensure that we're not doing away completely with what we've built before, but we are leveraging on it to keep up to speed with the advancement? And I think to call out here is helping organizations and technology teams drop the competitive mentality and build more on the partnership mentality that's being enabled by APIs. And I think this will be a benefit to the entire ecosystem. So I stop there, Sam, and hand it back to you.
Perfectly answered. There are some key insights that you've just given that just are spot on, especially when you're saying stop the competitiveness, get into leveraging into partnerships. Plus, if you add that to the comment you mentioned about the benefit of UX, it will be driven more towards consumer and less by the producer. So the needs will be driven more to the consumer. Perfectly answered. Thank you, Imelda. So that being said, Ephantus, what are banks' traditional approach to availing services to their customers? What do you feel is profound in that?
All right. I think first of all, Melda, good explanation on the API. I think I like, I can say two statements around what an API is also. So, and it goes back into the question, the traditional ways, how internally we have our teams, our relationship managers, your operations, your risk, especially risk and compliance and legal. You mentioned API and they run out of the room. They're like, we don't know what that is because of the regulatory side of things. So the way I'd like to explain to them, and the way I explained actually to our current lawyer, which she loved, was what is an API? So this is what I told her. I told her an API is if you walk, if you walk into a restaurant and then you sit down, when you get the menu or you scan the menu with the QR code and all that, do you order the food that you want to eat from the chef? Yeah. So of course the answer there is no. So what I go ahead to explain is that the API is the waiter or the waitress, because they're connecting two ecosystems. They're connecting you to the chef. So that's a very, very simple way to actually just look at API. So just going back into the traditional ways, and even something that I've always said within the banking experience that I've had is, and the things that you've seen within the market is, banking is not a place you go. So long time you had, oh, I need to get up, maybe our parents, you need to get up, go to the bank by 9 a.m. and deposit a check or withdraw money or anything like that. That's a traditional sense of banking. But as technology has come onto play, and also I'll speak about how COVID has also speeded up that transition into technology, is that banking it's something that you do. It's basically incorporate in your life. So for example, like Imelda mentioned about M-Pesa, so M-Pesa is allowing us to actually make payments from wherever we are. Yeah. You can even travel outside the country and actually utilize that piece. Of course, now within the banking, you find that banks are slow to adopt around some of these services in terms of, like, say, mobile banking, internet banking, and the rest. So the adoption first, as just to say, in terms of the traditional approaches, has been, can we open a branch to collect customers? So that is changing into the market of where can I launch a platform or a solution that can be that a customer can onboard from wherever they are, and even we capture the KYC, which is a regulatory piece. So that's so it actually starts changing within the banking. It starts changing the look and feel of the strategy, overall strategy. So back then we used to have file drop, so you have things like the corporates ask for a file drop, they drop a file somewhere on our server, and then we process the payments. Then we went to VPN, then we went to host to host. If you remember host to host, I was in some of the projects where it takes more than a good 8 months to do a host to host connection to a customer. So it takes so long, plus the security is not up to date around it. And so you find that the fintechs and the PSPs, even, they are now challenged, they start challenging the bank in terms of, okay, banking is something that we need to do. Yeah, it's very apparent. We need to, basically you need a bank for everything. So even if you look at, if I was to ask, for example, M-Shwari, KCB, M-Pesa, Buma, Fuliza, remember those are all bank accounts. Yeah. So when we start saying we've not done financial inclusion, guess what? We are doing financial inclusion through a partnership around it. So the banks have to take another, basically through the pandemic, it told us that it accelerated the need for basically the open banking or the open finance platform, where you look at most people are working from home. Most companies, so it really accelerated that. So the thinking of the bank, even from a standpoint of from 2020 to 2021 and now through to 2023, is looking at how can I capture more customers through this partnership, through this fintech, through this telco. So basically, that has sparked the conversation of how does a bank actually launch an API gateway for all their services. So just to add in there is one of the projects that we're actually doing. We've listed more than 30 APIs as Credit Bank, where we'll actually launch a payment gateway for almost all the services to a third party. Not because we've already learned in terms of internally in terms of how do APIs connect within our systems. How do we connect with our even with our vendors and all that? So the question is, how do we then deliver it to the market? So delivering it to the market is a strategy point again as the bank. So there are slow adopters to it and there are quick adopters to it. But remember, there are also challenges around it. Just the same way as a traditional bank. I was listening to the news today. Was like the traditional bank, or in terms of there's a training we are having basically. The fraud or the security about it was we're going off the way of how security used to be. Let's put guards. Let's put armed guards at the branch, because somebody will walk in and rob us, because that bank robbery was like that. However, now the bank robbery now, by doing the open APIs, what we're then starting to look at is how do we then protect ourselves? How do we protect our customers? How can we basically build a very, very robust system in terms of security, even in policies? So even going into the regulator, how do we regulate? There was a conversation we had, I think it was about just above a year ago, was how do you regulate APIs from a bank perspective? Because at this point does the bank say, fine, we have these APIs, but then the regulator says, okay, we don't know what APIs are. So some of the market leaders, and I know Charles will share into this a bit around it, would be how do you then regulate within that market of the banking? So just to go back into the question without going too far, traditional ways need to change. So the bank needs to look at it at a very, very different perspective and see how they can leverage open banking APIs to bring in more customers, more liabilities, increase their revenue, and basically do financial inclusion around it. I think I'll just summarize it from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Fantas. I think my take home is banking is something that you do. That speaks in huge volumes, especially when you talk about you're pushing up 30 APIs and you're just thinking of what next in terms of products. Products, I think for me would be, and I think everybody else seated and listening to this, products would be what consumers want to consume. At the end of the day, they want to hear what banks have to offer. The technological part can still remain as is. So going straight into our open discussion to everyone relevant in the panel is how can an API-first approach help businesses to innovate and remain competitive in today's digital landscape? So this question is open to everybody in the panel. Just to give a slight indication of what you feel needs to happen in terms of a competitive edge.
If I can say something, Sam.
Please do.
Okay. For me, when we are talking about open banking, is a really incredible subject, a very big story, but if you don't have a proper regulation in the territory where you are operating, that is not going to be success. Okay, so I can give you an example of what's going on in Europe so far, that many banks were spending a lot of money in order to create and open many APIs and integrate many APIs with many other things. Can you hear me, Sam? It's okay?
Yes, I can hear you
okay,
loud
sorry.
and clear.
Okay,
Loud
okay,
and
sorry.
clear.
Sorry.
Loud and clear.
So, and the point is that after talking to many banks and asking them how much investment they were making in APIs in order to do open banking, the reality is that nobody is really active or nobody is really motivated to do more things because the regulator don't force them to do anything. In the only country in Europe where you can see something which is working properly is in England, in the UK, because they've got a proper regulation, you know, and they are forcing the Central Bank of England to all banks to open all the APIs for third parties. So if you get that point, the market will explode and will start growing, because I don't see any other way around, you know, but you need the help of a regulator. If you don't have that help, the market will not be developed. And that's my personal experience here in Europe. Okay, so that's my personal opinion.
Nice, Sam. Maybe I could go next.
Yes.
Thank you. Maybe just to give two examples of two organizations that have taken a form of API first approach and how that has given them a competitive edge. The first one I'd give is Expedia. I think we're all familiar with Expedia. Expedia started off as a travel website. That's what they were doing. During the digital transformation, they incorporated APIs so that they could have third parties bring in additional products and services. So nowadays you can use Expedia to, there's a reward system now. You can get the taxi, you can get other services, you can get an experience, not just booking a hotel, but you can also get tour guides and all those things. So what they basically did for them is they turned themselves into an ecosystem by coming up with this API first approach. And we've seen them grow significantly. Also, bookings.com, also with their API first approach, do have a fintech arm. So that's very interesting seeing how they've been able to leverage APIs for that. The last example I'd give is Netflix. One of the key successes for Netflix when they moved from they rent a DVD to a streaming service, they do use a lot of APIs. Most commonly, what we think of their biggest achievement was to deliver for us the content distribution architecture, which is we heavily applaud them for that innovation. But a huge part of that architecture revolves around having a lot of APIs that has allowed them to implement services to web and mobile a lot much faster, a lot easier. And the structure of their APIs also allows them that you stream better on the application, even with low internet, than you would with most other services. So those two examples, I think, give very good use cases for using APIs to transform yourself, get yourself to be very competitive within your market, or even transform yourself into an ecosystem in the case of Expedia.
I'll chime in quickly about how organizations can really transform. You know, we are living in a world that is really fast. You know, things are moving very quickly. Competition is cutthroat, and we don't have the luxury to spend a year, 2 years to deliver a product to a customer. Somebody else will have overtaken. So I think mine, I just like maybe to point two items that Imelda talked about, building affordable technology and just quick go to market. If today you're a bank and you want to introduce a service, do you bring a team to start working on that service and start, from scratch, requirement gathering, design the whole waterfall? Or do you find somebody who has that service and an API connects to it and the service is available? I think it's a no-brainer. Folks in the bank, like Afanta Super, let us know. It's a no-brainer. You want to connect something that's available, offer your customer, back to the whole partnership approach, get a rev share thing going, and your customer has this service. So for me, I think it's really a no-brainer. You know, in a cutthroat world that we're living in right now, if I want to implement, you know, a machine learning model, do I start building the model, or do I go to some existing models that have an API? You know, someone mentioned ChatGPT. It has an API right now, and you can connect ChatGPT, leverage the functionalities almost right away. So for me, I just think that in the world we're living in today, the customers are demanding faster, better, cheaper, now. I like what someone mentioned earlier too about instant gratification. There's really no time to spend doing the whole waterfall approach. You know, I want it now. We are all kids today, and we want our things right now, right this minute. And I think API is just the way to stay competitive. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I think you're absolutely right when you say instant gratification has to be built in on a very fast mode as the market is moving quite as fast. It's a very sensitive particular point when you say regulator. I think maybe I can just pass it forward to any other panelists that maybe want to mention something when we talk about you need a regulator to enhance what we're trying to deliver into the market. Anybody who would like to mention 1 or 2, 3 things?
I can go
opinions?
I can go on that, Sam. And having experienced what has happened, and maybe for a couple of years, excuse me, I have a bit of a bug, but I'm on my recovery path. Anyway, the thing is, when you build into APIs, and you've seen what commercial entities and telco has done, ideally here we've not mentioned the fast-paced approach they have built into having what we call API management platforms. We have the Darajas, we have the Buni, Jenga, we have something with, you know, these major Taiwan banks, almost all of them have an API kind of front. The thing is, remember even in Europe, before you had the Payment Service Directive 1 and now getting into 2, and of course, looking into the Kenyan context, having this, the National Payment System Act, and of course, delving into the 2022-2025 NPS strategy plan. One thing that is coming out clear is, of course, the regulator noted that this is a space that has already picked off. And the best thing that I usually start is, you cannot actually start, I'd put it here, placing the horse before the cat, the cat before the horse. And with this, I mean, we needed to have, first of all, the disruptors actually opening up this market, coming up with these symbiotic relationships, bringing forth these kind of challenges that you're talking about. For instance, I'm raising, like, let's say, parking in town. How do you enable any financial entity to actually go and collect, you know, that kind of revenue? So how do we look at it in terms of the regulator? Of course, there are some acts that have been done in Kenya. They are not 100. They are not prime, let me put it that way. But what I've seen is continuous improvement. The other channels that we're given in terms of gaining pace into the API economy, which means that we have to build into, of course, feedback that we get from audiences. For instance, the FinTech enabled arm. There's a Kenya Bankers Association that always calls us. There's also the regulator that, you know, periodically, I think we do these surveys after every 6 months, and they ask these questions. Things to do with the SDGs, how are you helping in terms of, you know, eradicating poverty, health, education and stuff. And they point to what you're talking about. So one, I mean, hammering to the point, definitely it needs to be there. And if you saw the acts of 2021, I think 2022, when we had very high issues or very intense issues to do with AML, and of course, you remember, I don't know if I'd call it political instigated or not, but you get the context. This will tell you that the regulator was pointing into something that, even if we're so quick in terms of tapping into this kind of technologies, we should be very careful into, of course, observing the nationwide capitation on things like risk. Two, we have to evaluate, you know, the people that you are onboarding, the KYC aspect of it. Not everyone is a good friend. That's where you call it in banking. And of course, if you have that, then what we fog much into is, first of all, how do you build into friendly co-creation environments? Two, the collaboration aspect, which I'll speak into in a moment. How do you build the economies into platforms? For instance, what NLS is doing is a bridging into our core services. So meaning I don't have to let Joel and his friends come and integrate with microbanking directly. It reduces that impact. That is what the regulator wants first. The other entity is building trust, meaning that you're holding customers' funds or the payments or the payment gateways that are passing through this ecosystem has to be seen, has to be retained, and they have to be kept away from all those phishing and maybe fraudsters. Those are the things they're looking at. The other bit of enforcing, or the note you're talking about, which is open banking, is a totally different cluster, which we are trying to piece in Kenya currently. Here I'm talking about one, if you're looking at Sam being a subject, Sam is a bank customer. He's an insurance customer. He has his privilege to have a medical card with certain hospitals. And of course, these are data that are replicated everywhere. They all have his national ID documents. They have some other places, even his driving license, passport, and the rest. They know his family end to end. But this information is actually fragmented to every other entity. So what we need to build when we're talking about open banking, and this is where the amplification of services is leading to, is how can it be centralized so that it's open to all this ecosystem and we get to share. I think that is the impediment that you're actually pointing to, one, because if we don't have that, if we don't have someone monitoring or checking into how it's shared out, then competitive-wise, security-wise, data protection-wise, how do we govern that? So that is the biggest thing that we need to talk through in terms of having a regulatory space into it. But for APIs, I'm very happy. Actually, where I sit, I remember, and my friends can attest to this, back in 2016, 17, 18, you know, there was nothing like this. We were all looking at M-Pesa. We were only talking about how do I integrate to so that people can make payments. Right now, I'm getting a lot of, you know, things like EKYC. How do I get someone on the street, you know, opening a bank account without necessarily coming into a branch? All these are actually API-led kind of discussions. I can leave it at that, sir. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Charles. I think my take home would be the regulator is trying to build appetite for this space. And we're growing, we're getting there somehow. So when we're talking about best practice in the industry and we're talking about API design, Michael, what are some of the key considerations businesses should keep in mind when designing and implementing APIs as part of their digital transformation strategy?
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I think one of the key considerations, and I'll just piggyback off what Imelda said, was the business requirements. Essentially, you have to build APIs that fulfill a certain business requirement, whether this is geared towards customer revenue, a new business model, or it's geared towards an increase in revenue or a reduction in cost. That's one of the first key considerations. And I think I'm putting that at the top, and I'm sure Imelda is happy that techies are putting business at the top.
Oh yeah, UX strategy.
Yeah, I think then another key consideration is the design. Now, API design, or let's just make it maybe a bit more complex, the architecture of your API. This goes down to the security protocols it's using, it's HTTPS, goes all the way down to the type of API in terms of design. Are you using synchronous APIs or asynchronous APIs? In synchronous APIs, these are those that basically will send out a request and wait for a response. Now, such APIs are good mostly for internal processes. If you're fetching data from your database or from another internal service, these are very good because you expect them to have a high return. They're very easy to write. They execute quite quickly, easy to maintain. Then you have the asynchronous ones, which would send a request and then all other services would move on to other tasks and wait for a response. Now, these are more common with third parties where you don't know if the third party out there may time out or they have certain challenges, or you're not sure how much time the response will take and you want to create any performance bottlenecks. Now, of course, each of those two designs does have its drawbacks, its pros and cons. Essentially, I'd normally just say synchronous internally, asynchronous externally, but then also when you do asynchronous with third parties, you have to really have a clear outline in terms of how your APIs will operate so that you don't have an API listening for a response for 2 minutes. That's way too long for any API, 10 seconds at most, and maybe you're done. Even at 30 seconds, you then introduce new security risks for man-in-the-middle attacks and such. Another consideration, of course, that Charles had mentioned is API management. You do need to have an API management platform when you decide to go through API first driven transformation. And that's key, very important, because with that, you're able to do versioning, backward control, you're able to also monitor, which is a key parameter when you're coming up with your APIs. Do you have the tools and the capacity to do API monitoring? Are your APIs performing at the level required? Because if you can't monitor this, then your APIs may be consuming a lot of compute for you. So you're spending a lot on your resources. If you're on cloud, all these resources are being utilized, and you keep wondering, there must be something wrong with the cloud, but it's actually just on the implementation. But if you do have the monitoring in place through an API management platform, then with the monitoring tools, you're able to see which APIs need improvement, which APIs may have been written wrongly. Another thing is your standard of writing. Your APIs have to be written in a way that when the next set of developers or when the next developer has a look at it, they are not struggling to read it. There's this common meme that goes around where a junior developer is looking at a code and he's asking the senior developer, where's the documentation? And he points back at the code and he's expecting you to read the code and translate it, but he doesn't understand how the variables are named, doesn't understand why certain classes or certain protocols are being used. So it's also very important to have a proper coding standard for this. And I think those will be some of the key items around the right API design that organizations should take up.
Well elaborated, especially. I've seen a lot of, especially in my sector, a lot of customers asking on the FSP point of view, asking, can we get, once we monitor utilization or consumption, can we get analysis such that we can be able to draw back into granular pieces, who are these consumers and what are they doing? So well illustrated, well illustrated. So on collaboration, I'd like to drop up this question to Charles Kinyanjui. How do we ensure an API first culture thrives in an FSP institution?
Thank you, Sam. Maybe to elaborate, because I know there are many dictionary meanings to this, but when you talk about collaboration, first thing that comes to mind is working with someone. And for you to work with someone, definitely the objective here is to produce something. So the ideal is when you're looking at collaborating entities, and here I'm not just talking about bank, a fintech, payment service provider. I'm talking about just the economies around, the end customer. Ideally, what do they need to do? The farmer will not stop farming so that they can go to their mobile and crops grow their own. That will never happen. Transport, look at, like, let's say manufacturing, it won't happen. But then the fact is, to look at it in a holistic value in terms of how do they create impact based on whatever they're trying to generate, their outputs. How do they work on the efficiencies? Well, to decluster this, we usually pilot in terms of, or pivot in terms of 6 key elements that you need to look at. One, on a collaborative indices, you have the real problem, what you try to address, what you're trying to address. Here is an opportunistic way of looking at it, a challenge or something that you need to change. For instance, I've been doing this forever and ever. I've been digging, I've been putting the same fertilizer. Nobody has told me ABCD. How do I need to address? Whom do I need to work with? So there needs to be that bit where we share minds and be able to come up with a solution based on that. Two, there's a business model. This is actually a big challenge, and I see it in collaborative entities, especially when you're talking about banking and also fintech. Well, if you look at, like, let's say some models, they replicate an aspect of either let us work for this so that we can share the main grain, or let us collaborate on this so that whatever they are making out of it, then it can, that kind of symbiotic relationship. Others want to sell you these kind of entities once it has got into a certain juncture. For collaboration to work, you have to piece in at what point you're coming in, what kind of partnership you want to generate with an entity. For instance, if I was building into, like, let's say, hospitality, what impact do I want, first of all, to create to the person who is being attended to, before I actually talk about things like revenue share or the technologies that I'll build on. We've spoken about regulation, and I mean, it builds into trust. You remember, when it comes to digitization, the main aspect here is actually trust. You put money somewhere because you actually trust that entity. There's other things we can debate, like, let's say, personal greed or something. But what comes to mind is that you will apportion a big chunk of your funds towards something that you know will give you returns, and you trust that entity because they'll hold it until you get that piece of relief. So meaning regulation comes to protect that bit, and also to square out, look at what are these people doing? Are they the correct people you should be working with? So that is very important. The other thing is talent. What we see in collaborative spaces is where you want to discuss everything from commercials to development to the developer. Seriously, it doesn't work that way. If Joel will tell you, there needs to be the person who's a finance guy, there needs to be a person who understands going to the ground, there needs to be a foot soldier. These are things that you need to plant in, you need to plug in. You don't say that you want to, maybe for startups, you don't want to say that you want 50 or 20 or 30. But when you're creating a niche or neat kind of platform on a collaborative framework, look at synergies you can build together. For instance, what I've seen, especially with the InsurTech services, banks have direct sales representatives. They can match on any product that you want to push to market. If you're doing piloting, instead of this fintech hiring their own DSRs, as we call them, they can actually use, because these people have been trained, they are skilled, they know how to approach you. You don't have to go and do corrective things. So meaning you gain pace as you go on with this collaborative spirit. So talent is equally important. You need to map it initially when you're doing stuff. The other bit is innovation. We talked about the real problem, addressing the real problem, but then the innovative aspect of it. At times, you collaborate, but you do things backward. We still want to meet somewhere and contribute money just because we think we can do things together to empower ecosystem. But then in the spirit of APIfication, in the spirit of digitization, we need to look at, anywhere else, you need to look at whatever you can do. It needs to be very autonomous, very little friction between you and I. And the whole compact reason is because what you're looking at is these synergies that you've built together. I built a legacy entity. I want to change and transition to another place. Can you help me? Then you bring in your middleware. I'm able to surface all these oscillation items there, and I bring other parties to be able to join into that discussion. So maybe just to keep an umbrella into this, or to give it a compass view, collaborating entities, one thing they must have is they must have some commonality. Two, there's that sense of understanding that we are pivoting on a mutual beneficial kind of entity. And three, it needs to be less frictionable, because if I want to handle a fintech with the kind of banking processes that I have, let's build onto paperwork, let us do this, feel that, go there, take, bring, no, you kill that kind of spirit. So it needs to be very mutual, very open. And this kind of APIfication kind of discussions have actually led to that kind of place. Thank you, Sam.
Marvelous, Charles. Talent, yes, the belief of capability of doing everything. I think it's best illustrated when you map out precisely what you're capable of doing and what is incapable, and source. Really good illustration, Charles. So I'm going to jump into the security question, and which is going to be addressed by our panelist, Juan. So please, Juan, tell us what is needed to ensure safety and securing of open banking platforms.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, before taking this question, I would like to give you a context of what's going on, at least in Europe, about open banking, because I think it's correlated to my answer, and it's important to put in situation everybody. I was checking just a few days ago the statistics of the European Central Bank about the consumption of open banking. How much was the investment per country on open banking? And if you look at the numbers, are quite relevant. Practically, the majority of countries, they are over $100 million investments on open banking. But as I said before, why still open banking is not flying in Europe? And from my point of view, it's a matter of business. Who is going to make business with open banking? Because banks value a lot the data of their customers and they want to get something from that, okay? And third-party collaborators, they want to get those data in order to launch new business lines. So this is a big topic in Europe, and this is the major reason, as I said, is not flying well, this concept of open banking, because the regulator, even if we've got a regulation, PSD2 regulation, is not forcing banks to really open and share their data in a normal way. Let's say the only country who got a proper regulation about that, it was England. And that is the only country where you can see a very important deployment of open banking. And to be honest with you, is where you can see a real benefits when banks are sharing data with third parties, with other APIs, and they can make money all because they are bringing value. But the reality is that banks they want to become to take the whole market, the whole ecosystem. When you are talking about open banking, they want to offer all the different services, but from their apps. Okay, so they are trying to cap and to catch as much market as possible, but from their app, not allowing others to do business by their own in a simple way. So this is something very important that you have to take in mind. I'm talking about Europe, of course, and this is something that is coping, for example, Saudi Arabia in the regulatory market, okay? So when you are looking at the spendings and on what exactly we are investing on open banking in Europe today is practically payments. But if we are thinking about open finance, we are going to start sharing data with insurance, asset management, mortgages, pensions, which is quite interesting. But even more interesting is going to be the open data, how they call it now, the European Central Bank. And what is open data? Basically, to get access to telcos, utilities, healthcare, retail, cities, everything, okay? So that is the real story about open banking right now in Europe. And why I'm mentioning this? Because obviously, with the increase and adoption of digital services, there has been a dramatic increase in cyber threats and data breaches, making data privacy and security more important than ever before. When we are talking about open banking, when a third party wants to integrate their APIs with a bank, exists a potential security risk. And I would suggest to approach that in two major ways. The first way is how to protect the APIs, because banks, they want to integrate with other APIs, but how you can control that the info coming from one specific API is really coming from that API and is not from other, or is not a hacker who is trying to change the message. This is an important point. We have to secure that ecosystem. And how do we do that? It's absolutely a must that we have to invest on a PKI infrastructure, okay? A PKI infrastructure at the end generates digital certificates to all APIs you want to connect in order to identify each of them and to protect the communication channels. So that is one specific concept that is absolutely important everybody take in mind while they want to connect with many different APIs. But the second one, the approach I would suggest, is to establish a zero trust architecture, which has emerged as a robust solution to address these concerns. It's, I mean, high time that consumers or APIs start demanding zero trust from their online services providers. The traditional perimeters based approach to cybersecurity is not sufficient to address these complex and evolving trends of landscapes. The fundamental underlying of zero trust is never trust, always verify, ensures the access to sensitive information and resources is granted only after the proper authentication and authorization. From a consumer, from APIs and online services providers perspective, they would get the following benefits from my point of view. Enhanced security first. Zero trust enable enterprises to offer their consumers an high level of protection from data breaches and unauthorized access. When the breach occurs, by limiting the horizontal progression of hackers or attackers, vital services and systems can stay operational. Really important point. Greater privacy. By ensuring that only authorized individuals and systems can access sensitive data, zero trust helps maintain privacy and minimize the risk of the misuse. A zero trust based system will honor consent from consumers and comply with data protection regulations like GDPR, guys. And the last one, proactive protection. Consumers trust online services providers with security of their data and identity rather than waiting for a data breach to occur. Demanding zero trust encourage proactive approach to security, which will result in a more secure online environment. So that is what I really think everybody should take in account when we are talking about open banking in order to create a secure ecosystem and allow users, because at the end, our users, the end customers, are going to be the principal actors in the whole story of open banking. You can integrate so many different APIs, but if you don't have customers who are going to consume those APIs, there is no value behind. So from my point of view, extremely important, think about how to protect APIs, communications with a PKI infrastructure using digital certificates. And secondly, how you are going to create a secure ecosystem with a zero trust environment where an identity access management will take a real key place. Okay, so that's my answer, Sam, about all this.
Beautiful, very insightful. Protect the APIs, zero trust architecture.
Yeah.
Direct to the point. Perfect.
Totally.
Perfect. Perfect. So I'm going to jump into what's the future outlook? What does it look like for specifically Kenya? I'm not going to go to the African region. So Joel, how do you see the API first culture evolving over the next 5 to 10 years in Kenya? Or probably even the next one?
Thank you very much, Sam, for that question. Well, in my personal opinion, there's two things here. There is using APIs and adopting an API first culture. Now, in terms of using APIs, definitely, like we've all said, I think we're all using it in some way. We all need to use it, and we will keep using it. So I'm going to talk about using APIs first. You know, I think all of us in some way, form or fashion, are using APIs. You know, our developers want fast, quick solutions. We have to integrate with Google API to offer some mapping components. Even in our advisory services at the moment, for example, when we talk to customers and help them with selection of vendors, for example, we bias towards vendors who provide some APIs, vendors who have open systems that we can talk to each other. So we will continue using APIs. We talked about things like machine learning, AI. For us to leverage those very quickly, as accelerators, we need to connect, to APIs from some of the providers of some of these models very quickly. The challenge, however, is where I see this being an issue, and especially in terms of an API-first culture or an API-driven culture, is that a lot of organizations already have legacy solutions that are in place. So we rely on aggregators probably to offer, some API sort of band-aids or, ways that we can connect to other, to connect systems to each other, which is fine. It's a starting point because we cannot throw away everything that we have already. But if you look at truly adopting an API first culture, an API-driven culture, it requires the mindset to really shift towards leveraging solutions that are interoperable, where as you are buying solutions, you're thinking about what we call disposable technology. I'm buying a technology that I know that I can dispose very slowly, very, very easily as needed, and I can connect very quickly to other solutions. So in my take, over the next 1 year, over the next 5 years, we will continue leveraging APIs. We will continue buying solutions that are probably API driven. But in terms of truly leading an API first culture, I think we will still struggle with that. Part of the issues, again, is going to go back to regulators. Are the regulators creating the right framework to be API driven? Now, we're talking about things like open banking, and as one has rightly put it out there, do we have the right regulatory frameworks to lead an API first culture? Because talk about open banking, how many banks in Kenya right now, for example, are willing and ready to open up, to service providers, to vendors, to really work with the rest. So culture, regulations, I think those are going to be blockers in this. And I think in summary, we will continue using APIs. We will continue because we see the need for APIs. But in terms of truly leading an API-driven culture, I think this sorts of conversation are what is required to continue pushing the industry and the market towards a truly API-first culture. Thank you.
So from what I get it, we are growing with in some, the regulator still has a lot to do with referencing of giving the entire environment the capability and culture. Are some of the FSPs ready to embrace this kind of culture and reduce the competitive nature and say, you know what, the cake is too huge, these consumers and they need this, they actually need this, right? So
that is correct.
Driving to that kind of nature, maybe I can, this is a question to the entire panelists. In your own experience, what have you missed from financial institutions that have adopted an API first culture? And how have they built products on this layer?
Maybe I could go first, maybe from a banking perspective. And here we're talking about witnessing either productization or just an impact creation within that kind of ecosystem. One thing that I've experienced, especially coming from the banking sector, is that currently, if you do not speak APIs, then you're not talking to the future generation, you're not talking to the trend, you're not realistic. I want to point out the just released, a couple of weeks back, you saw banks release their financial results. And from the speeches you had, most of the CEOs were pointing to, you know, 90%, 95, almost 99 point something, you know, sort of customer interaction to banking through digital assets. The thing is, for you to power anything, for instance, at National Bank, as you know, we power most of the MDAs, the ministries, departments, and agencies. Part of the struggle is usually to have what we call B2B or business to business or business to government kind of services. So I'd say the panelists, the attendees here want to go and pay for, like, let's say, Kenya Revenue Authority, you want to pay for your NSSF and HIF, but then the outreach is almost impossible. One thing you realize is that also these entities, they're not stalled to where they were when they were created. Most of them have adopted very complex ERPs, that is enterprise resourcing platforms. And they need to talk to something. They have modules that actually attend to some bit of finance. So what API First has actually led to is actually bridging those kind of relationships. Meaning, for instance, if you piggyback to the channels that you already had, the legacy, the brick and mortar, I have a branch, I have an agent. You want to go there and do statutory payments. You want to go there and do career payments. You want to go there and pay even for school fees. So it means that you are bridging two entities, bringing them together, and you're actually consolidating the entire ecosystem and enabling the people on the ground to actually do it. So these are things that we already seen or have experienced. The other bit, of course, that we never talk about, or we always at warpaths around it, is about these fintech relationships. If I don't have an API or we don't have APIs, then we can't. It's not something that we can converse on. Ideally, it became a currency. For instance, Joel will approach me and ask me, Charles, do you have APIs that do A, B, C, D? Then, of course, match on, I'll say, I have them. Where can I get them? Ideally, access became an issue. So the part where you're seeing banks building into API management platforms is actually to necessitate that kind of discussion. The currency here is actually the APIs. They need to do it. So meaning, if you build or you want to build a coexistence that is built on co-creation and collaboration, then you have to attribute that one to an API first kind of economy. So I think those are the cases that I've seen built into those. The other bit, and I think I'll call it a long ball to this, is actually what we call containerization of APIs. As you see, currently, it's quite tough, and I'm talking about just pulling out APIs and listing them as a store item. I want to use a cluster example. You remember back in the days, and I don't know, I know nowadays, if you go to or you tour some exotic places, this actually still happens. Hotels used to have the menu list, the title was just displayed outside the hotel. You never used to get the booklets that you get whenever you go to eateries. Ideally, you have a context like that. If you want to look at banking, if you want to look at financial provision, if you want to look at API being containerized, that is how it should be. Then you should actually be positioned in a way in which someone can get in and get out, having sampled, gotten the results, and thought about whether to continue the discussions with you or to leave at that juncture. So containerization is actually that bit that maybe we never address so much, but it's the application bit of making sure that all these microservices, all these APIs are seated within one central location that actually meets a certain economy who can actually talk into it in a faster way. Meaning you could be sampling out, like, let's say 20 APIs right now, then you decide I'll only sign up for 10 or I'll only sign up for 5. Ideally, that's the way it should be, rather than me passing you documents with the same code scripts. That's how it should be. I think maybe those are the top of mind kind of elevations that I look at.
Good. Anyone else?
I think just to piggyback very quickly on what Charles is talking about, I think most banks and companies are realizing that the future is data-led. The future is not transaction-led. Somebody mentioned very well about having the same customer in your bank assurance system and the same customer in your core system and in so many other systems. Traditionally, it's transaction-led. Bank assurance guys, go sell. Core guys, go sell. But I think the more that banks are realizing that the future is data-led, all this data sitting across all the different systems, if brought together, and the insights from the data could really power a company to the next level. So we see use cases like, I think in the US, you have banks like BBVA that are very good use cases of API-led organizations. These organizations are not just using APIs on top of legacy operations just for the sake of integrating. They're actually rethinking the whole architecture. And so it's an API rethink, for the entire architecture. When you talk about starting to bring in things like API management platforms, it says that now you understand that you must be thinking, rethinking your whole architecture to APIs and not simply bringing the band-aid solutions for this particular use case. I'll expose this to, and then for this use case. So I think there is need to take a step back, rethink the whole architecture, knowing that the future is data-led, and being data-led means everything must be talking to each other at any given time, and just rethink the architecture. So I think that sort of mindset, even as we are providing advisory, as some of us in this panel probably do, is something that we need to start preaching to organizations. I think that will probably fast track the adoption of the culture. Thank you.
Interesting. Data is gold. So we've reached a point where we are going to summarize. I'm going to give this opportunity to my fellow panelists in giving your final commentary in just 2 minutes with reference to driving this culture. What does it mean? So I'll start off with Ephantus, then we can kick it off step by step.
Thank you, Sam. I think very good points from panelists, my fellow panelists. So for me, I think I'm just looking at also some of the challenges, which even going back to Yuan alluded to, the regulator assistance of regulatory framework around it. So that's one big challenge that we will face around the API adoption. Another thing is on the education. So education is on the customer education. I think Charles and even Joel touched on it in terms of that. So even I was reading an article the other day, is like, for example, how much data would you want to share with the bank, so and how regularly do we even update this data, and how do we then also verify and check that this data is correct? So that in itself is also in terms of the data, how do we manage it? So that's in terms of the education and how much data can you ask from the customer. So that goes down to the education, and then the second bit is around, or the third bit is around security and the fraud. I think also Yuan alluded to about the security of the gateway, and also in terms of even the API manager that fellow panelists have touched on, because now that brings the aspect of the fraud. So that's something that the banks, the financial institutions are looking at very closely. And then you have the user protection. The user protection is, again, going back to what Charles said, is it's money, and even the API is a currency. If I give you my money, do I trust you? So you're finding a lot of fintechs or fintech customers saying, okay, fine, I give you my money. I've always given my money to X bank. Now I'm giving you my money to this fintech or this company. Is my money safe? I mean, that goes a long way in terms of the user protection, and we need to build rails and collaborations around that piece. One thing around, just going back into the previous question, was in terms of the challenges or the experiences I've had in terms of this. So there's something that I think it's something I'll even need to call Bana Charles here in regards to the e-wallet as a service. E-wallet as a service, you'll find every discussion around with a PSP or even with especially with a fintech. The first question they'll ask you, yeah, you have APIs, but again, remember, an API is supposed to be an access to to do financial inclusion. So the product is, at the end of the day, you need a bank account. That's what I'm saying. You need a bank account for everything. So that money will be sitting in a bank somewhere. So even today you have your M-Pesa, there's money sitting in a bank account somewhere. You put money in, wherever you put digital money, there's also an equivalent sitting in a bank account. So the main thing is around how do we then formulate that into words, a very key and basically overlay a product or a service or a solution around that. And just to close off, I think having a partnership, having experiences with a fintech or a PSP, asking a bank, I want to partner with you. There's a lot of people who want to partner with the financial institutions, and they'll tell you, okay, we'll give you this type of solution so that you can give more customers. But the times have changed. I think the bank wants to see, on behalf of the banks, I think the banks want to see that you've actually have your own customer base before then saying, okay, let's partner on this, let's collaborate on this, let's co-create. I think that is very key also, because then that overlays creation of a product which is very which now pushes the API first approach around it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Michael, your final commentary.
Thank you, Sam. For me, maybe just trading off what the previous panelists have spoken. I think when it comes to an API-driven approach to transformation, I think especially for the financial sector, there's a significant need to have a stakeholder engagement so that they have a unified architecture plan towards this. I remember when I was in banking KBA through some of the various committees were working on PKI for the entire industry. This, of course, is one of the could be one of the few building blocks towards having API-driven architecture for the banks, because it is also a challenge for third parties, for example, the fintechs and other third parties, when they're trying to integrate to all these banks and they have different API structures, different protocols. So it becomes also a tedious thing to juggle. And then that translates back into the quality of the code, because if developers have to write APIs for 30 different banks because everything is so different, it's not uniform, a bit of complacency there can breed into a lot of security issues. And I think we've seen those security issues in the past where APIs have been exposed due to poor practices around how they're developed. But I think as much as it's a good thing, moving forward, there should be some standards which can be set as industry standards that should be followed to ensure that not only are we taking up this approach of utilizing APIs to grow businesses, but we are doing it in a secure manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Charles, your last comments?
Mine, I think if you're talking about API first of all, it has to be very intentional. Here, I mean, it's not something that is just put on a strategy deck. You know, I've been in situations where you've seen that many people are saying digitize, oh, we are digitizing, oh, we are going, oh, APIs, but you don't have the rude awakening, or you do not have the impetus of actually doing it. So the intent should be there. It should be by heart. And actually, in putting everything in paper, then the execution aspect of it, based on the strategy, should kick off. What you've seen, or what you've seen currently, is that it's something that is not going away. Again, this is the future that we're actually looking at. But then, what is the intent? What kind of support do you want to pump in? So mine is just a call to action for everybody, the developers, those that are checking on things like end user, boundaries, those that are piping in on certifications and all, third-party entities. I'm talking about NLS. How do you help in terms of democratizing this kind of discussion towards everybody who needs to understand that they need to pagine or they need to plug in someone into this kind of ecosystem? And that way we can see this rapid growth in terms of, or momentum growth in terms of digitizing, I mean, all sectors, the agriculture sector, the transport, manufacturing, hospitality, we're talking health, all this will actually be chimed in if we're actually picking this very intentionally. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Charles. Juan, your final comments?
Yes, Sam, I'm totally agree with Charles, to be honest with you. I share the same vision, the same view about how it's looking the market and how we should progress in order to find new challenges. As I was mentioning at the beginning in my speech, you know, I mean, as it's getting bigger and bigger, this open banking that is going to be called open finance, and in the next open data, you know, security is going to become in a critical point. Okay, so we cannot think about creating an incredible ecosystems of many APIs integrated each other without thinking about security, how we are going to secure the infrastructure of the APIs. As I was mentioning, my approach would be using a PKI infrastructure with digital certificates in order to authenticate each of those APIs in a secure way. And in the second way, how we are going to create a good ecosystem, a secure ecosystem for our consumers of all those APIs. Never forget that. This is the key point. If the consumers, they don't use the APIs, they don't generate business. And if nobody's generating business, this is the end, okay? And we must really take care of those guys. How? Thinking about establishing a proper zero trust framework with an identity access management technology, which really allow the companies to control who is getting access and with which type of authorizations to each application or to each API. So that is, for me, the most important concepts when we are talking about open banking. We really have to think about security. Without security, the business is going to be very, very difficult in this digital world. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much. Now over to Joel.
Thank you very much, Sam, and to the rest of the panelists. For me, I think my closing shots are going to be around being partnership driven. I think for me, being API driven means you have to be partnership driven. And I have a couple of quick scenarios that I want to draw here. Just last week, we were talking to a customer in Uganda who were trying to provide some channels to, the mobile channels and everything else. And the feedback was that the core vendor, had blocked off the system and they could not talk to anybody else, right? And for that, very laughable, but suffice to say, by the end of the week, the customer decided not to work with that core banking vendor anymore because it's just not realistic. So we mentioned partnership, being partnership driven. The cake is too big to eat, and that is the whole concept of being open and the API conversation. I think as service providers, we must agree that one person cannot do everything. So we must be open, we must collaborate, we must provide data access. That's from the service provider side. From the businesses side, trying to offer value to let's say customers, members, people who bank with us. I think there's no two ways about it. I think the API culture, has to come top of priority. The API architecture has to be rethought. We have to stop thinking about the band-aid sort of ways to mitigate some short-term strategies and think more in terms of how do we adopt a full API architecture as an organization. And maybe just to go back to a point that the Fantas made, in the true culture practice of today, where even partnerships, even for vendors, you're asked, what are you bringing to the table? You have to come with some customers for us to partner with you. I think at Pathways, that is a model that we are taking very seriously. And a quick example as I close, currently we're working with a big group of farmers, for example. This group has almost 50,000 farmers. We have a credit scoring model. And as we speak to a bank, I'm saying, hey, look, I'm bringing my scoring model and coming with these farmers that you can score and make them your members. So it becomes win-win-win all around. I think for me, that collaboration-driven model is something that we all have to think and look into. And the last sentence is adopt or die. I always say that it's more of an alarmist sort of a statement, but APIs are here to stay. We have to go with them. We have to just adopt them. Otherwise, our competitors, take off, and we're left wondering what happened. Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you, Joel. So we've reached the end of our webinar. I would like to take this foremost approach to thank our panelists and highly appreciate about your insightful feedback of the questions, and also give a huge thank you to the attendees who were able to make time for this session and listen and pick up and also ask their intuitive questions towards this session. So once again, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you so much to everybody. And wait to hear from us. We'll have a volume 2 of our webinar with regards to ongoing businesses on the open platform banking. So this is to say thank you once more. We are free to leave.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to be
Thank you,
here
everyone.
with you.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Have a good day.